I love it.
Hello and welcome to Crosstalk, where all things are considered. I'm Peter Lavelle. Ending Syria's horrific civil war is possible, but the political will to do so remains elusive. Over the years, facts on the ground have changed, the rise of the Islamic State being the most deadly new player. But Washington and its regional allies remain focused on illegal regime change in Damascus. The West is fighting the wrong war and will surely lose the peace. To Crosstalk, the Syrian civil war, I'm joined by my guest, Richard Murphy in New York. He is a former U.S. career ambassador to Syria and currently an adjunct scholar at the Middle East Institute in Washington. In San Francisco, we have Scott Bennett. He is a former U.S. Army psychological warfare officer and counterterrorism analyst. And in London, we cross to Kapil Kamareddy. He is an Indian journalist who's reported from the Middle East. All right, gentlemen, Crosstalk rules. In effect, that means you can jump in anytime you want. And okay, Scott, if I can go to you in San Francisco, a lot of people would say that's an understatement. Confused. Go ahead.
Well, yeah, I think he nailed the key words, though. Confusion and fear is strickening the Middle East, and it's particularly strickening Europe right now. The stakes have all changed, Peter. With this mass refugee foreign person invasion into Europe, you have Germany and all the European countries going into confusion and fear about what's coming. And like I said, you could have a meltdown similar to the Iraqi meltdown when the U.S. went in. They were happy for a while, but then they went into complete anarchy and bitterness and resentment. And the same could happen in Europe. This is a great opportunity for President Putin to take a page Scott, out of President Ronald Reagan's book and be a positive person.
Yeah, but Scott, if you read the Washington Post, this is an opportunity for the U.S. and its allies to again attempt toppling the legitimate regime in Syria. I mean, you've learned the right lessons, but the administration apparently hasn't. You want to continue? Go ahead.
Of course, the administration is a dismal failure. It's an apocalyptic failure. It is arrogance at the highest point, and it's not reflective of the American people. The American people do not want to displace Syria. The American people do not want to displace Assad. They want order and stability and safety. They've been propagandized into thinking that Assad is somehow going to go in and annihilate Texas or Washington. That's BS. That's nonsense. But you now have a dangerous position where Obama and these clowns on Congress, Capitol Hill, are so arrogantly obsessed with U.S. policy becoming a law of nations that they aren't smart and prudent and cool-headed enough to step back and say, let's look at the lessons learned from our failure in Iraq and create a stable environment in Syria. First and foremost, not about democracy, not about self-representation, but about stability and order, and work with Russia and Syria.
Let me go to Scott. I mean, you can go even further. I mean, you have Qatar, you have Turkey, you have Israel, you have Saudi Arabia, other Gulf countries that are fueled this on money, training, moral support. I mean, come on. I mean, there's no modesty right here. There's an enormous amount of arrogance. But the thing is you keep trying the same policy and you don't get the result you want. That should tell you that you should try something else. Scott.
Yeah. Well, you're exactly right. There is no modesty. There's nothing but arrogance, and it's self-destructive arrogance. And the destructive party is going to be, unfortunately, Europe. Europe is falling apart at the seams as we speak. Now, that could be either the fall of Rome into a dark ages, or it could be a renaissance of Europe into the stronger pre-Schengen European Union, where every country is its own country again. And I think Russia could step in and say, we are European. America is not. America is between two oceans. We represent the solidarity and protection of Europe. Let us come aside and be your ally and first control this exodus into Europe. And I think the Eastern European countries, the post-Soviet countries, are going to take lead, Peter, because they've got the intestinal fortitude that Germany and France and Italy seem to totally lack. The Eastern European post-Soviet countries, I think, are going to step up and redefine Europe, and hopefully it'll be a renaissance. But this silliness about the U.S. not having a role is absolutely wrong. We have financed this operation. I saw the money trail, and I wrote a report on it and sent it to 150 congressmen and senators, and they all covered it up and did nothing. I saw the Swiss banks. I saw the Abdullah Aziz and the Saudi Arabians and the Qataris and the Kuwaitis. I saw the checks. I saw the money. And it outraged me, and it outraged all the Special Operations Army guys that I work with, because we said, why aren't we putting out these fires? And the answer was because they're defense contracts. Booz Allen Hamilton, which was my employer, they live like parasites off of these wars. And that offends some of those of us who've joined the war to finish it and go home. But unfortunately, America is fast becoming a myopic defense contractor country that is looking to continue these operations, and the chaos is causing all of this radioactive human shrapnel to avalanche into Europe. The traffickers who are taking them into Europe have said, quote, they will dominate Europe. We, the gypsy people who are pushing these people into Europe, they're going to dominate Europe. That means it's going to be a slow invasion force, and the only answer to that is to stop the mass exodus, redistribute it, control it, and set it back to their point of origins or to these other Middle Eastern countries.
Let me ask Richard a question before we go.
The idea that the defense contractors are running foreign policy is a tempting one. It's an oversimplification. It is a potent factor and probably more powerful than
I was
it should
there.
be, but,
I saw. That's exactly what they do.
What's wrong with that?
President of Syria's opinion that?
What are the choices? Richard, what are the choices?
I just don't think it's going to work.
So they should just surrender and be slaughtered.
That's
what Washington wants. Surrender and you'll be slaughtered. There'll be ethnic cleansing. That's what will happen, and you know it. That regime will fight to its very end because of the people it's fighting, and now you have ISIS as a result of a failed policy in Iraq. I mean, if I were Assad and his people, I would be really hunkering down, and that's what they're doing. It's logical. It's rational. Okay, Scott, you want to jump in?
Well, I would just say you're right, Peter, on the analysis of Syria fighting to the death, because they're going to be slaughtered if they don't fight to the death. The question is it in Europe's best interest for Assad to stay? I think absolutely it is. Every European country should say, our objective is to protect our own citizens, our own family, our own national sovereignty. And to do that, we have to have a strong regime and personality to control the exodus of these refugees and these war victims of the U.S. hegemonic wars. Now, as bad as the wars are, and as sad as we are that the U.S. has gone on this insane route and never finished the wars properly, we have to contain the damage so that it doesn't infect Europe and destabilize and destroy Europe. I don't want to see refugees going into Europe drinking water bottles that the liberal left peace activists give them, and then throw down that water bottle and grab the European by the throat and say, surrender your wife and children. This is now the dominion of our new Islamic Europe state. That's what Europeans are very concerned about. And the only people that will give them stability
the refugees coming into Europe
the
are not
Russian
going to grab your wife and children.
Let's go to Kapil here, right here. Let's go to Kapil. Go ahead. London, go ahead.
I'm terribly sorry. I must disagree with that characterization of refugees as a menace, as a potential threat to Europe. I don't see
They're
that.
not refugees. Some of them are, and some of them are war activists going in to destabilize Europe. Don't make that mistake.
That's just a very appalling characterization. We've just had in this country.
They're doing it to the Yazidi women. They're doing it to the Yazidis.
We've just had an election in this country, and a very fine man called Jeremy Corbyn has been elected, and he's trying to change the language we use in talking about refugees and talking about international affairs. And I think we need to evolve a more mature vocabulary than to demonize people who've come in desperation. I think, and also in agreement with you, all I will say is that you don't resolve the problem of refugees by bombing countries. You don't bomb your way to peace.
No, and you don't resolve the problem by letting a whole mass exodus of refugees, some of which are terrorists, come into your country and totally take over the country.
You give aid to people in need.
You control the borders of your own country.
All right, let me go to Richard. Let me go to Richard in New York, gents. Let me go to Richard in New York. I mean, Richard, you just heard the exchange there, right? You just heard exactly, and it's man-made, and it was made in Washington for the most part. That's my whole point here.
Peter,
we wouldn't have refugees if we didn't have wars of choice. One war of choice after another. I mean, after Libya, didn't anybody learn anything? And now it continues. This is just this is criminal. This kind of mindset here. I'm sorry, Scott. Go ahead. Jump in.
Peter, I would just say Vladimir Putin should not be asking permission from the West or the United States how it conducts himself in this whole Syrian Europe mess. Vladimir Putin needs to step in and take leadership and say to the Europeans, look, we represent you. We're for your stability and safety and order. Let us help you. Let us work together. Let us stem this and not just open the borders and turn this into a mass refugee relocation program. Your concern is to your borders and your citizens. We're concerned about that because, as it's been said before, some of these people could be launching military attacks in Europe and in Russia. The Europeans will side with Russia. The Europeans will side with Putin, and they will slowly divorce themselves from the U.S.
Scott,
and the U.S. policies
Scott, we're
because they will
rapidly
see
running out of time,
these
Scott.
policies are
I mean, with
destroying
the sanctions because of Ukraine, I don't have any confidence in the Europeans at all. Zero. They work against their own national interests time after again.
I don't think that
If I win, I am going to instruct my Attorney General to get a special prosecutor to look into your situation.
Hello and welcome to Crosstalk, where all things are considered. I'm Peter Lavelle. Conflicting narratives and competing agendas. This is the tragedy of the Syrian conflict. Western media coverage is focused on forcing political outcomes. In the process, the truth is often overlooked and even denied. Another casualty of war. To Crosstalk Syria, I'm joined by my guests, Jonathan Steele in London. He's an international affairs commentator. In New York, we have Daniel Lazar. He's an author and freelance journalist who writes frequently about the Middle East and Eastern Europe. And in San Francisco, we cross to Scott Bennett. He is a former U.S. Army psychological warfare officer and counterterrorism analyst. All right, gentlemen, Crosstalk rules in effect. That means you can jump in anytime you want, and I very much appreciate it. Scott, if I can go to you in San Francisco, and thank you for getting up so early to join us here today. One of the great myths that, and it's perpetuated over and over again, is the term moderate. And from what I can tell in looking at people that have been on the ground and real experts, not people that don't want to peddle a fairy tale about Western values and all of this nonsense that we hear nonstop. I mean, they all tell me the term moderate is an illusion. It's a fantasy that comes out of Western media.
Yeah, it's an amazing degeneration of the American media mind, and I would say no good journalist or newspaper has really come out of the United States since 1980. I think all the good ones stopped writing in the 70s. And you see, I'll put on my PSYOP hat for a minute, you see a coordination between the American media and the government policy. We've seen it since 9/11. We've seen it in the taking down of countries, 5 countries in 7 years. And you see a media that is backing this myth that the moderates exist, and they're trying to overthrow a tyranny and a dictator that's, in Assad's case, bombing his own people. And it's complete nonsense. And I about jump out of my seat when I hear people like Sean Hannity say the Russians, the Iranians are working with the radical Islamic jihadis. And I say to myself, that is absolutely a lie, because the Russians and the Iranians are the only ones looking for peace and stability in the Middle East. The radical jihadis are the Saudi Arabian Wahhabi Salafists that the United States has been backing, in addition to Qatar and Kuwait and all these nations that have been financing terrorism. Now, the American media, the good news is, Peter, there are thinking men and thinking honest men in Washington that are not buying the media drivel anymore. We are standing up. We're listening to a lot of sources such as RT, such as your experts in your show, and we're coming together with a different narrative. And from an emotional point, we see John Kerry, we see Obama, we see Hillary Clinton having a sort of a mental breakdown.
Yeah.
You can tell when people lie.
Yeah.
You can tell when they stutter.
You know, Daniel, that's a very good point. That's exactly where I wanted to go. I mean, I watched some of the State Department briefings, and I call the press corps that show up there the stenographers union, because all they do is write it down, and there are 2 or 3 people that sometimes ask questions. I mean, how did we get to this point here? I mean, if you go off the reservation, if you don't have the right narrative, you're not going to be published. Are you worried about your career? I mean, I can tell when these people are listening to these briefings that they're not really convinced. But anyway, they write it down. One of the
Go ahead.
extraordinary things in the coverage of Syria in the West is that it is the Syrian army that has been doing the heavy lifting for years, fighting terrorism. But you wouldn't get a whiff of that idea from mainstream media.
Well, Peter, it'll delight you to know that I'm going to be talking with Senator Dick Black after your show, and I'm going to bring him all the great points that you're making. He is one of the American politicians that is standing up for President Assad and for Russia and for Iran, that is saying these countries represent stability in the Middle East. And he's said before, what have we become as Americans where we're backing these boy-beheading, women-raping savages that have been causing turmoil and destabilization and infiltrating the Middle East? So these American journalists, and I would correct one thing. These journalists, I don't think we have much of a free press anymore. I think we have a press that is dominated with corporate interests, with big donors, with big money, and they follow the stream. They don't have a love of truth anymore. There's no men of letters. There's no educated poets that really take language seriously. And as a PSYOP guy, I know the hearts and minds are influenced by language. And the American people, Peter, it should encourage you, they're very well familiar with the Russian people and the Russian culture. And I always correct people who try and label Russians Soviets.
Yep.
No, sorry, they are the Russians, they are the Russian people and the Russian culture, and they represent better values than most American media do.
That happened to you when you were on Press TV a couple of days ago. I'm glad that you picked up on that because it happens sometimes. Scott, can you reflect upon that? Because there's no agency with the Syrian people. They're just subjected to terror. That's what we hear all the time. It's not true.
It's absolutely false. Now, the other alarming thing is with the degeneration of the American media, and I think you're going to have a retraction of the American military footprint out of the Middle East, because I honestly think, and I hope Donald Trump steps up and beats Hillary Clinton, because that's our only pathway to peace. Hillary Clinton wants war. I think Trump would back us away from that. But here's what's alarming. When this Syrian operation happened, which was not an accident, I know that from my experience in the military and the intelligence services.
Hold that thought. Okay, gentlemen, we're going to go to a short break, and after that short break, we'll continue our discussion on media coverage of Syria. Stay with our team.
Well, when you had the Syrian operation where the Americans bombed and destroyed the Syrian forces with A-10s and F-16s, you simultaneously had operations within the United States, which people in the community and the psychological warfare and military environment have looked at as coordinated operations to delude and detract the American consciousness away from Syria into the United States. And specifically, you had a bombing in New York, you had a disruption of a Marine marathon parade, you had 60 schools in Canada evacuated, all supposedly because of domestic disturbances. Now you've got a Black Lives Matter shootings. They do this to distract Americans away from Syria, away from the Middle East, away from the United Nations Potential War Crimes Tribunal for declarations of war, away from the fact that the United States bombed or with Mossad and Israel, bombed the other convoy with laser technology. Americans don't see that because they're distracted by the media to these other alternative information sources. That shows me and many, many others that the American media cannot be trusted. The alternative media that is rising up has much more sway on people. But I think in the long-term geopolitical interest, as the American footprint begins to pull back from the Middle East, you're going to have an increasing domestic disruptive state in the United States. And, it doesn't bode well for the United States. But I would also end it by saying Vladimir Putin has a great opportunity, as does Iran and China. They have the opportunity to appeal directly to the American people. You can't trust John Kerry. He's a liar. You can't trust Samantha Power. She's a liar, as is Barack Obama. But they can write a general letter to the American people in the New York Times, the Washington Post, saying, "Dear American people, we do not want a war. If you don't want one either, vote with your heart. Vote to stop these wars. Vote to reject the candidates that want those wars.
I really
the
wish
American people would support it."
Well, Vladimir Putin had an op-ed not long ago. I think it was in the New York Times, and it was a good op-ed, but it was completely vilified by everyone because they don't know anything about Russia. But let me go to Daniel
somehow
here.
Mossad is involved in the bombing of the convoy in Aleppo. That's, to me, is just crazy talk. The things are bad
electronic
enough,
surveillance
but the
will
problem in
indicate,
the
it
U.S.
will provide the evidence.
Let me finish.
No, let's say what Daniel. But I think I think it's really crucial also to point out is that the American people are not aware of the backing that certain American intelligence agencies and administrations are backing up the bad guys here. And I mean, if you were to explain to them who these people really are and take out the word moderate, I would hope that they would be appalled, but they're not told that. I mean, read every major broadsheet, you know, American allies in the region, rebels, American-backed rebels. I mean, they use this fictional language here. I mean, if they knew who those people really were, then I think that maybe they would be a lot more questioning. But if you don't know that, then why would you question? Really tragic that a lot of media always tries to look for virtue, and when politics is not about virtue, unfortunately, it's a different species here. But you know, Scott, you know what? Just recently, John Kerry is calling for a no-fly zone. And with the ceasefire, I mean, it was an amazing step. The Assad government agreed, because Russia was going to back it up, that certain areas there would not be any planes. Okay, that was part of the deal. Now Kerry's saying, after the Americans bomb Syria and kill Syrian troops, now he wants this again. And I went through all the major papers before we came and convened here today. And when I first read this, I thought, well, my goodness. I mean, now the United States will be official air cover of ISIS and other terrorist groups. But as I was reading all the broadsheets, nobody came up with the same conclusion. But mine is the obvious conclusion. But no one there is talking about it. This is what I'm getting at. Go ahead, Scott.
Yeah. Well, keep in mind, there's, in a military frame of mind, you have a goal, you have objectives, you have strategy, you have tactics. The goal of the United States since George Bush carried under Obama has been U.S. hegemony over the world. That's the goal. The objective has been destabilization of the competitors. The strategy has been destabilizing these countries from within, and the tactic has been using the injector as human rights violations and religious persecution, playing the victim card. So there's a goal, objective, strategy, tactics that the United States has been waging against Russia diplomatically, militarily, economically, and informationally. So you see John Kerry and these other puppets starting to lie and fumble and fall all over themselves and look down at the ground and get nervous when they tell these lies. The American public don't buy it. Many of us in the military love Russia. We love the Russian personality and cultures. I worked with Russians in the military, and I have seen a lot, Peter. I saw it at the State Department. I saw it in the Army. There's a lot of horrific stuff that's causing people like me to come out and speak truth, because this isn't just about destabilizing, you know, a region. This is about threatening all of the world and civilization. The United States has caused so much chaos and havoc, it shames me. And so does it many other politicians to say, what have we become? Okay. What in the heck are we doing? We have ravaged Europe, and the way to correct it is to have good people rise up to Congress, and I will do that myself, taking this platform, and I will challenge people.
Let me go to Daniel. Give Daniel here the last word here. Many thanks to my guests in London, New York, and in San Francisco. And thanks to our viewers for watching us here at RT. See you next time, and remember, Crosstalk rules.
if I win, I am going to instruct my Attorney General to get a special prosecutor to look into your situation.